collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we talk to the European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management about a new project entitled #SchoolForAll.
If you give hope, dignity and prospects in Africa, in Middle East, definitely the people, the teenagers, they will want to stay in their homelands in order to continue their lives with really dignity and some prospect.
And we meet a teacher in a Ugandan refugee camp who is himself a refugee.
The schools in the camp particularly are quite different from the schools in other areas and in Europe because the classes are under trees, then children sit on the ground.
As the latest EU report shows that Cyprus is going to miss most of its environmental targets with an increase in the use of landfill on the island, we talk about the circular economy.
We are already behind in recycling in general. We are not managing the green waste well. We have problems with management of organic waste, which is non-existent almost. So therefore, we are going to have huge problems with regards to new targets that are going to have.
In crisis-affected countries around the world, humanitarian emergencies and protracted crises have disrupted the education of some 75 million children between the ages of 3 and 18. Among refugees, 39% of primary school-age children and 77% of secondary school-age adolescents are not enrolled. What's more, girls living in conflict-affected countries are 2.5 times more likely to be out of school than boys. I was in Brussels earlier this week, along with 400 students, teachers, policymakers and humanitarian aid experts who met in Brussels at the launch of the School for All event. Together with Christos Stylianidis, the European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Denis Mukwege, as well as Handicap International Ambassador Axel Red, we took stock of the achievements so far and launched a social media campaign to raise solidarity with crisis-affected children who are out of school. After the event, I spoke to the Commissioner and asked him to explain what the School for All event was all about.
The whole idea is to raise awareness about education emergencies. Why? Because, first of all, for me, it's a really positive obsession in a good manner. I realize on the ground the necessity and the importance of education, especially in emergency situation. And at the same time, we saw from the beginning of my initiative, 5 years ago, that this field was the most chronically underfunded field in the emergencies.
Okay, it has been neglected because obviously in a war situation in particular, the first priority is tent over your head, some food and safety. But you're losing an entire generation if they don't have the tools that they gain through education so that once the conflict is over, they can be constructive, contributing members of society. Now, you've managed to get that message across, I think, in the EU because you've increased the funding considerably. Tell us a little bit about how much more is being spent now. I was amazed to hear that it works out at something like €4 whole per EU citizen a year, which, when you think about it, is less than the price of a cup of coffee at the airport.
Look, first of all, €4 per European citizens is only our contribution to the whole humanitarian assistance, European humanitarian assistance. So, especially for education emergencies, is really less.
So tell us a little bit about the other humanitarian assistance that obviously as the Commissioner you work with. What else do you do?
We provide humanitarian assistance across the world, especially in areas affected by crisis. shelter, food, clean water, sanitation, everything about the basic needs, the urgent basic needs.
And we should emphasise there that we're not only talking about war zones, floods, for example,
of course,
fires.
natural disasters, everything, definitely. All areas affected by any crisis or natural disasters. But why we focus on educational emergency in this special event? Because I saw on the ground through my personal experience in many areas, and in particular in Africa, in areas affected by Boko Haram activities, and also in the Middle East, Lebanon, Jordan, inside Syria, Iraq, Mosul, and so on, that definitely it was so important to find ways in order to combine the traditional humanitarian assistance with education. And the first goal was to give protection to the children, more than knowledge. But during the process, we realized that we can combine also protection and knowledge.
And with knowledge, they can learn to protect themselves, can't they?
Definitely. So I totally agree. So, as I said, my turning point was my experience in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, but also in northern Nigeria in Yola, a small town very close to Boko Haram controlled areas. And I saw that, as you said, we have to find definitely and immediately after when the war is going to stop, to find specific projects in order to provide education. Otherwise, if we lose this period just after the war, we will see a long generation. Because if someone will be out of school more than 6 months, in this case, it's very difficult to go back. So, and this is why I insisted on this, and this is why I increased 10 times. And frankly speaking, it was a very demanding objective, you can imagine. It's difficult to persuade the people to go beyond as business as usual. So now, European Union is leading by example, and I saw that many other countries in our member state, they are thinking about also their initiative to increase their budget about education emergencies.
They're also, I think, beginning to understand the knock-on effect that a lack of education from these people has. And I'm talking about the loss of hope, and then very often the radicalization and the need for migration and the fact that they think there's a better life somewhere else. Have people made that connection yet? Because kids who've received a basic education, and in the films that you showed at the event, we saw them saying, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a nurse, I want to be a teacher. They have ambitions that could help their own communities if they're given the chance.
You already said everything. And thank you so much. But definitely...
it's that connection, though,
yes,
with migration. We have all this anti-migration feeling in Europe.
If you see, if you give hope, dignity and prospects in Africa, in Middle East, definitely the people, the teenagers, they will want to stay in their homelands in order to continue their lives with really dignity and some prospects. Otherwise, they have to move in order to find better conditions for their lives. As simple as that. So we have to invest more in this field, and we have to invest because, as we said with my dear friend Dennis Mukeke, is the best shield against radicalization, against forced recruitment. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, they offer $100 per year in order to recruit people there, teenagers.
We're talking about child soldiers here.
Yes, of course. So, against forced labor, forced marriage, early marriage. You saw the video, 18 years old with 4 children. And as Dennis said, that the baby with the baby. Really strange. So, I think difficult the experience, the hard reality on the ground, definitely forced us to understand and to accept that, yes, education is the only way, is the last shield against all these bad things, abuses, exploitation, and so on.
Right, now you've been giving a presentation in Brussels and Raise Your Pencil. Tell us a little bit about that, because you involved a lot of Brussels school children in that. And generally speaking, I think the reaction was positive. There were a few naughty ones at the back voting no all the time, but I think that was just a manner of speaking. What are you hoping that will achieve with children seeing what disadvantaged children in other places in the world have to face?
I can say that my experience from this special event and the reaction from the students, from the teenagers, was really very positive, because I saw in their eyes that they understood that they have to raise awareness through social media about this so necessary issue.
What's your message finally to the people of Europe when it comes to the humanitarian programme? Because a lot of them say, oh, we've got our own problems, why are we helping others?
Education. And if you want to reduce also your problem inside Europe, you have to invest in education outside Europe.
Christos Stylianidis, European Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid and Crisis Management.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
One of the speakers at that School for All event was Leke Emmanuel. He's an accelerated education program teacher at the Bongilo School in Palorinia refugee settlement in northern Uganda's West Nile region. Palorinia is one of the largest refugee settlements in northern Uganda, with some 119,000 registered refugees, almost all of whom, like Leke, came from South Sudan. I spoke to him after the event and asked him to tell me his story.
I was, first of all, a refugee in Uganda from 1990 to 2006. Fortunately, peace returned. I went back to South Sudan to start work as a teacher. Then later, another serious war broke out in 2016. And that war pushed me out, like many other South Sudanese who are already in the camp. And so in the camp, I started teaching. Until now, I'm still teaching.
In a refugee camp in Uganda?
Yes, I teach in Palorinia refugee camp in northern Uganda.
Who do you teach?
I teach vulnerable communities of South Sudan who fled the war in 2016. And they get educational services from the community with our support and support of the Save the Children, but also with funding from European Union.
Now, I think that the facilities that you teach in are nothing like the schools that most Western children would be used to. Tell us what it's like in Uganda and the sort of improvisations that you have to do in order to teach how you want to teach.
The schools in the camp particularly are quite different from the schools in other areas and in Europe, because the classes are under trees. Then children sit on the ground, but there are also temporary houses which are made of carpet. But it's quite challenging to teach in those houses, simply because sometimes when heavy rain comes, it blows off the carpet and children do no longer have any chance to learn in them.
What about school supplies like books and pencils and so on? Where do those come from?
The school supplies like books, pencils, they come from Save the Children, which is supported by the European Union, and children use them for writing in the class. Yes.
In your presentation, you said, I think, that you teach about 10 to 18-year-olds.
Yes.
What happens to the kids who aren't yet 10 years old? That early learning is so important. Do they get any education at all?
Yeah, the ones we are targeting in this particular project are children who have never had any opportunity to go to school for a long time. And so it's like a catch-up program to make sure they are able to catch up with the rest. Like they are 9, 10, 12 years at home, could not access education services, but now it's also an opportunity that they have crossed over to Uganda, and the government of Uganda also supports that catch-up program.
But what about the kids from, let's say, 5 until 9 years old? Do they have any access even to play education?
Yes, they have. We have what is called nursery education, and so they go to the nursery, but they don't come to the primary.
So they stay in nursery until they can come at age 9 or 10 to the proper education.
Yes.
What about the future? What does the future hold for these children, let's say, when you've finished with them at 18 and they're still refugees? Do they find jobs in Uganda? I know that they need to work in order to maybe keep their skills up to a certain level for when, hopefully, they'll return to their own country.
When these children finish their primary education, there are still hopes that they go to secondary school, but I don't think there is any possibility of them to further their education. So unless peace returns and later they go back home, they will not be able to further their education. But also it's my cry that we don't let them stay at home even when they have finished secondary school. It's important that if there are willing bodies that can support education after primary school or after secondary school, so that children can access technical education, like in building houses, in repairing motorcycles, in any of the technical works, in order to keep them busy and be able to earn a living, is much better.
And do any of them who are still in the refugee camp then volunteer to help educate the kids who are still going through the process? Because not everybody, I presume, can find a job that pays a wage. So if they haven't got a job, are they incorporated into life in the refugee camp in a positive way?
Not really. If they have not been able to finish, they will live in the refugee camp, but with a lot of difficulties, of course, which later on becomes a problem to the entire community, because it will be difficult for them to earn a living, and that might even increase crime rates in the camp. Once someone is idle, idleness is a devil's workshop, and so the devil begins working on the mind of such a child.
Leke Emmanuel, an accelerated education program teacher in Uganda, who for the second time had to flee his home country of South Sudan. He mainly teaches social studies, maths, as well as Can't Wait to Learn. That's the tablet numeracy games initiated under the Include programme.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
A few weeks ago, we covered a conference that took place in Nicosia entitled Circle 2019, looking at challenges for the islands in the era of a circular economy. The other part of the conference was entitled Smile 2019, and that looked at intelligent transport and sustainable mobility. Well, attending the conference was Greens MP and former Environment Commissioner Charalambous, and when I caught up with him, I asked him to explain what he thought the most important points were that Cyprus could take away from such a high-level conference.
One of the important issues, and I was glad to hear this, was the support that the European Commission is willing to give to island states with regards to public transport and connectivity with mainland Europe. So this is an issue which is one of the biggest problems that we have, the lack of public transport in the extent that we would like it to be. And therefore I was glad to hear that we are going to have stricter control and support, if you like, on the policies of the public transport. With regards to the circular economy and all the aspects of it, we know that we are having problems with waste management. And I worry with what's going to happen, the pressure we're going to have to catch up to the ever-increasing targets that they set, either for recycling or for minimizing waste and having certain rates of plastics, for instance, recycling and stuff like that. We are already behind in recycling in general. We are not managing the green waste well. We have problems with management of organic waste, which is non-existent almost. So therefore, we are going to have huge problems with regards to new targets that they're going to have.
So how do we approach what we need to do, and do we need to prioritise certain areas that will have the biggest impact fastest?
The good thing that is happening now, people have not yet seen the results, is that for at last we have the management of waste under a minister that knows his stuff. Up to now, up to 2 years ago, the management of municipal waste was handled by the Ministry of Interiors. And now, after in my opinion, the extremely bad policies that they designed and implemented, we now have this shift from the Ministry of Interior to the Ministry of Agriculture, and they are actually now preparing a new law that will put the waste management procedures, the items, the targets under exactly what the demands are of the directive, EU directive on waste, which is the Directive 98 of 2008. There, we are going to have separate collection of organic waste. We are going to have recycling all over the island. We will force everybody to recycle. And there is also the obligation for every local authority in every area in the country to actually do a plan on how they are going to do the waste. So therefore, we have big changes coming here. So therefore, with regards to this, we have something to look forward to, which is also part, of course, for the circular economy. But there are things like, for instance, what we have from the European Parliament yesterday, for instance, with the banning of certain plastics, that this, we will get the law in Cyprus, we will have it, but everyone realizes that this is not industrial products that we produce, it's mainly products that we import. So the implementation of the directive in Cyprus will have the significance that it will forbid the import of these one-use plastics, the single-use plastics, like, for instance, the ear batonettes or the plastic plates or the plastic spoons, the sticks that kids use to hold the balloon, and these are the stuff that will no longer be allowed to be imported in the island in 2021. But it won't affect our industry as much.
But it will be easier to implement in the sense that we just stop it coming in.
Exactly like what happened with, for instance, the light bulbs. We had the new regulation coming in. The tungsten light bulbs were forbidden from being imported. We have the law. We then got LED lights, for instance. So this is the way things are going. There are interesting aspects in the circular economy. Aspects, for instance, like the fact that certain items will have, by law, an increased guarantee period, manufacturers will be forced to provide spare parts, and manufacturers will also be forced to provide for repair manuals. So this is the whole package, and we're going to see things coming up step by step.
It sounds like, in a sense, we're going back to the way it used to be.
Yes.
You used to darn socks.
Yeah.
You used to
Yes.
replace parts
Exactly.
of your iron and so on. And does that mean that manufacturers are really going to have to think carefully, because they have become used, I think, to producing items which have a very limited life, so that you have to buy a new one and replace it. But I remember in the old days, fridges lasted for 50 years.
Of course. From a discussion that I followed, because I read a lot about this, what the manufacturers say is that we can produce items that can last longer. Is the pressure from the commercial aspect that is making us do products like we do now. For instance, the example they were telling was the example with mobile phones. I know in Cyprus this is not common practice, but abroad, within the plan that you get, usually people get the phone through a mobile plan that the telecommunication authority offers, so that you pay a little bit on increased amount and you get a phone which is, they say, is free, but you actually pay it in small installments. From the small installments that you pay, if you do the maths, you'll find that you actually pay more for the phone than the actual value that you would buy it if you got it from a shop. So telecommunication companies make a profit out of pushing every now and then, making you change the telephone. So they are responsible for the pressure on the phone manufacturers to actually have this, if you like, to change the phone every now and then. Because if you look at the phone, the updates and all these things, although the phone is in good, the hardware condition is quite good, eventually it becomes unusable because of the updates and the new models and the pressure, and they come and tell you, I know your phone is okay, but if you pay me, if you like, I can take it back and you buy a new one. And they, in a way, the market forces make us change this every now and then.
So you say that's going to stop?
It's going to stop because they will implement policies to reduce this from happening. But these are the forces that are actually battling each other. I don't know what the eventual result is, but at least this is the target that EU Commission sets in order to minimize the electrical and electronic waste, which is make it last longer, be serviceable, provide spare parts. And let me just say that if one looks at the waste framework, the directive, you'll see that the number one priority in management of waste is to have policies to minimize waste. The number two priority is repairability, reuse. So anything that I can do to promote reuse is also important. But a policy, for instance, that will make a telephone last longer, or a piece of equipment or a fridge or whatever you have at home, an appliance, last longer, is a policy that minimizes waste, which is the number one priority. And number three priority, first of all, as I said, is minimizing waste, reuse, and number three is recycling. So this is the reason why in the cycling economy, minimizing waste and property science is so high in the agenda.
Let's hope that some of it will get implemented here eventually. Perhaps not sooner, but later is better than never at all. That is Bambos Theobemptou, Greens MP and former Commissioner for the Environment. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.